morning. Good morning. I want to welcome you out to episode 16 of Get It Minds podcast. We up here, we starting a little later than usual, but one thing I wanted to tell everybody is that we're going to do them at different times. Sometimes this shit just get everything going and flowing. But we got a couple dope topics this morning. For everybody who tapping in with me on Facebook, good morning. Everybody tapping in with me on Instagram, YouTube, good morning, good morning. I promise y'all that once we got this year started, that we was going to get straight back to the information. Y'all had to forgive me for yesterday. It was a lot going on. It was the first day of the new year where I never made it, but it was just so many other businesses I had to handle, but we're going to make it safe. So good morning, everybody. We got a couple dope topics this morning. We're going to be talking, I'm bringing Dr. Ben lecture back, and when he's talking about history, because I know a lot of people, one of the things they were telling me about, everybody wanted me to continue to, I get my camera to continue to educate and keep bringing the good information like from before we got to the podcast. So this morning, and I hope my camera focuses. This morning, the only thing I want to do is help us get a better understanding of where we're going. So our topic is we're going to talk about Dr. Ben today, and he's going to break down Egypt. We also going to talk about Pope Francis opening the doors that they, and the, should I say like the Latin word for it is like portus, as if like portal. And we're going to talk about some of the other things that we've seen going on, and we're going to break down short convo. But as we get into it this morning, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start off with my intro. Good morning, everybody. If you hear, like, comment, share, subscribe if you're on YouTube. Help me get more people aware to the show. And so let's get to it.
Mr. Lowe. Tell us about your father.
Why don't you tell us something about your father?
We're trying to get to know each other, Mr. Lowe.
I was trying to get to know you, Mr. Tolson.
Well, I'm not the one on the debate team.
Are we not engaged in a debate right now?
All right. I'll take the affirmative. Take the meanest, most restless nigger. Strip him of his clothes in front of the remaining male niggers, female niggers, and nigger infants. Tar and feather him. Tie each leg to a horse facing in opposite direction, set him on fire, and beat both horses until they tear him apart in front of the male, female, and nigger infants. Bullwhip and beat the remaining nigger males within an inch of their life. Do not kill them, but put the fear of God in them, for they can be useful for future breeding. Anybody know who Willie Lynch was? Anybody? Raise your hand. No one? He was a vicious slave owner in the West Indies. The slave masters in the colony of Virginia were having trouble controlling their slaves, so they sent for Mr. Lynch to teach them his methods. The word lynching came from his last name. His methods were very simple, but they were diabolical. Keep the slave physically strong, but psychologically weak and dependent on the slave master. Keep the body, take the mind. I and every other professor on this campus are here to help you to find, take back, and keep your righteous mind. Because obviously you have lost it. That's all you need to know about me, Mr. Lowe. Class dismissed.
It's out of here. So I want to welcome everybody. We're going to get to it. We get into straight information this year, but I wanted to talk about this morning before we go forward. Man, I want everybody in this year in the 2025, which if you really understand and you one of the deep thinkers or one of the researchers, we know that the real new year don't really start technically into the Chinese New Year, because the Chinese New Year they still following the ancient calendar, ancient times, which is spring. The first day of spring is really the new year, which will make sense. After winter, it's like nature replenishes itself. It like go through a flush out cycle, and then in spring, it starts over. So for everybody we in 2025, and we saying New Year's, that's the New Year that was symbolic to us, but it's not real New Year. So everybody's still dealing with that same energy and feel like, well, I'm glad that 2024 over. Keep a mental note that we still technically in 2024 until spring. It was the Europeans and the people who came up in America that decided to change these things for their reasons. But I'm saying all this to say, my first day in the new year, I had to navigate so much bullshit day one. And just good energy, bad energy, confused things. Well, not always bad, but in the aspect of people and their uncomfortable energy or people and how they feeling. So my advice to everybody, like, yo, this year, I think that we've all said that last year and the last 2 years has been a very strange time. Don't let nobody destroy your peace. And I started realizing, like, we got to navigate these waters of problems, just like if we was out there trying to find land. And my best advice to everybody is stay focused, stay consistent, you know what I'm saying, meditate, stay on your shit and stay focused, because what we should have learned in the last 2 years is that learning how to minimize the distractions and learning how to kind of stay away from people. And it's not even about disrespect. Learning how to stay away from people who bring your energy down, who make you look at things crazy. And if you've been second guessing shit, like if you know a female or a male that you've been around or whoever, and it's like you constantly got to go through the same cycles with them, it's up to you to break those cycles, right? And so that's one of the things about these convos and spiritual. Sometimes I used to get up in the morning and we be chopping it up. And just like some of the people that watch the convos or that's now in the podcast, the people that watch them, I realized that we all needed the convos in the morning spiritually, because we don't know what we're going to face all day. So when we getting up in the morning or the afternoon, what we feed ourselves every morning is the key, right? And it's crazy because yesterday I was breaking it down and this African dude was telling me, he was like, bro, stop using the word morning. And it clicked to me just now, because he was like, when you say good morning, what you're really saying is when people are mourning, it's like somebody passed, right? So it's like the next day after somebody you know or somebody you just lost a very important loved one, and they be like, good morning. That means like you're still recovering. Have a good morning period. So that's why we shouldn't use morning, because the more we realize that they're setting us up for our casket, right? So just like when I was studying Egypt, when I looked at the way they set up the pyramid, like the way they set up the Holy of Holies and like what they call burial places, and they had the Holy of Holies is like our bedroom, our master bedroom. Then they had a living room. And the living room was for the places where people live in. So our whole life they prepping us for our burial and our death. And that's something that we all need to understand. Now this next part in this next clip was something I found that I thought was bugged out. So I'm gonna let him break it down. Let me start it fresh.
So let me get this straight. 2 astronauts, right? Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore went out for a space mission, an 8-day space mission back in June. They get trapped out in space on accident. Wasn't planned. But they just posted a picture today wearing Christmas hats. Lock in, okay? Let me explain this to you. They went out for an 8-day mission back in June. 8 days back in June. Today, since they're still trapped out there, they sent us a picture to be like, hey, we're doing all right. Why do you have Christmas hats on? Where did you get them from? Where did you get the Christmas hats from? Listen, I'm not a conspiracy theory. I'd rather just have the answer. But 2 things don't add up to me. If the mission was only 8 days back in June, there's no reason for them to have Christmas hats in December. How would they have Christmas hats? The mission was supposed to be 8 days in June. You were supposed to be back before Christmas. There's no reason for you to have Christmas hats. Now also, if you're telling me they're sending them supplies, why would you send them Christmas hats? They're trapped out in space. They want to come home. And you're sending Christmas hats? Something ain't adding up. I don't know exactly what it is, but something not adding up. Something not adding up. I don't know what y'all doing. Something not making no sense. Okay, so let me get this straight.
When I seen this, I said, yo, I understand a little more than probably what he do. He said they went out for 8 days in space, right? And it's Christmas now, and they saying they got stuck up there, and so he's trying to figure out how they got hats, Christmas hats. Genius question. Couple things you need to understand about space. They told us on accident back in the movie Interstellar, time and space, time on Earth, 2 completely different times. There's astronauts that can go, and let's say they're supposed to be on the space station in orbit for, let's say, hey, shut up. Let's say they're supposed to be on the space station for 30 days, right? It's been proven that an astronaut spent 30 days or 3-4 months in space. When he left, his daughter was 2 years old. When he came back a couple months later, his daughter was 5. Time in space, time on Earth. 2 different things, right? And I want y'all to pay attention to what I'm telling y'all if anybody think that I'm just bullshitting y'all. Time on Earth, the time on Earth and the time in space are 2 different times. So if they went out there for 8-day mission, of course they're going to tell us that they overstayed it. But the 8 days in outer space, the question is, when are they going to tell us the truth about how the time lapses? Remember, the travel in time is the travel in outer space, right? So what does that tell you? The travel in time, let me change my light, is the travel in outer space. So yes, they're out there. Hold on. They're out there, right? But we got to learn that the time is different. So they went out there in June for 8 days, and more than likely, it might only be day number 7 out of space or day number 3. But on Earth, months have passed because time in space and time on Earth is different. That's why they were saying, the scientists say, or the astronauts will tell you if you study, that traveling in space and time travel is almost one and the same. And that's what's going on. So when this man is asking, how did these 2 astronauts get Christmas hats? One, it's possible if they still up there, they do got to send them supplies. So if you want to just get on a basic level, for some people that'll say, well, they just send supplies. They send supplies up there because they still got to send them food, stuff they need. So of course you can send Christmas hats. That is pretty true. It's not an impossible answer. But I don't think they would be too happy, but they will make the best of their situation. The reason why the astronauts are out of space and he's trying to figure it out is because 8 days out of space can be equal to 5 months on Earth. We know this for a fact. When astronauts leave, they show you one thing, but when they come back, they really don't show you. And so even in the movie Interstellar, he left in one of his missions, but he had only been gone for maybe a year or 2. But by the time his daughter found him and folded space to get him out of the place he was trapped at, she was 80 years old. So they always telling us in movies what the truth is and what isn't. So I wanted to bring that to y'all because I thought it was very interesting. You know what I'm saying? And I thought it was very good in the aspect of logic and what he saw and how he decided to break it down. Right? And so we're gonna keep it moving this morning. I got a lot of information to get to y'all. So let's talk about just more about the Olmecs, because that's one of the ancient oldest civilizations in America that we know of. And I always try to give y'all more information because we on America and China this year.
About the genetics of these Native American, but the Olmecs seem to have very similar features: the thick lips, the
Yes, they do.
wide noses. Why do we think that is?
Well, this is part of a curious mystery that is not unconnected to the genetic mystery.
The Mother High culture in Mesoamerica, the one who brought in all the hallmarks of civilization, from writing to mathematics, stone building and religion, that culture shows some very interesting properties. But when historians demonstrate that these cultural features are not alien at all, but clearly displays similarity with its black African counterpart across the Atlantic, these historians are immediately cast aside because of the implication of these statements. And yet, there is a large body of evidence that shows that the Mesoamerican civilization was kickstarted by Africans around the year 1500 BC. So much so that despite centuries of denial and cover-up, we can still see the signs in many aspects of the Olmec culture and the cultures that followed it. In 1862, when the first Olmec head was discovered in Tres Zapotes, Jose Melgari Serrano examined the head and noted the following: that the statue had a large flat nose, full lips, and almond-shaped eyes. The winds of yesterday sing into our sails the name of the ancient ones. The Atlantic Ocean was always thought of as an uncrossable barrier, a 7,500 miles crossing that historians say was only made by the Vikings, all the while disregarding the receipts of numerous waves of African crossing and influence into the New World. I mean, one has to be blind to the fact that the Mesoamerican civilization miracle can only be explained once it is put into the context of an African seeding. Not because the people of the region were not capable, but because the Africans happened to have nurtured those sciences for millennia and had the practice of consistently spreading it to the rest of the world.
You heard what he said. He said, not because they're Africans, but because we had already laid down a certain format and foundation historically, right? When you look at these pictures right now, you see how like that's an Olmec statue. It looked like the Sphinx, right? And all of these are, you know, like Mexico, Egypt, they had already laid the groundwork for what to do. You know what I'm saying? So that's why when you go to these ancient cultures, you see these stone structures and stuff like this. There's no question. They keep comparing our history of what we did to aliens. It's to the point now where I'm starting to think, well, maybe when them shits do touch down, whatever they are, when they open them doors, there's going to be people. Now, remember, if our ancestors went out of space, and let's say they went somewhere and they might have been trapped for 30 years, or whatever the case, the journey they took would have took them 10 years or 20 years in space. And they come back as 20,000 years and passed. We don't think about this shit. That's why it's important for us to understand what the importance of who we are.
They call it a mystery. The sudden emergence of the Olmec civilization in 1600 BC as a fully formed civilization. If that was the case, then we would not be able to link its civilizing elements to existing and older civilizations. The Olmec writing system is often referred to as the Cascajal script because its most notable evidence is found on the Cascajal block, a stone tablet discovered in the Olmec heartland in Veracruz, Mexico. This writing is considered one of the earliest known writing systems in the Americas, dating back to around 900 BCE. It predates all Mesoamerican scripts, such as the Maya glyphs, and is believed to be the root of these later writing systems. The Cascajal script can...
So this year when we seen a lot of people that was arguing, like, and no disrespect to Hispanics, because I had a lot of Hispanic friends, but a lot of the people that was arguing the point that we were making up this history that we teaching, like people like me, was to try to say that, you know, it's a miseducation. A lot of civilizations around the world, they don't know. They really don't know the truth, so they arguing off of what they was taught for their self-worth and their pride. But they're telling you that this is one of the oldest writing languages in America, even predating the Maya, the Inca, and even these people were still the sense of us, brown people. But for all of the historians and the people that's why they don't talk about the Olmec civilization, because we talking about, and really they're just talking about, and keep in mind, they talk about like Mexico and South America, and they don't include America in these. You'll learn that. So just America is like older Mexim, newer Mexim. You know what I'm saying? So just like in Africa, the bottom of Africa is at the bottom of Africa is where life started, and then it moved upward, just like in South America. So that's why life came in at the bottom and then moved itself upward. That's why all of the history moves in a similar direction, at least from what they allow us to know.
Contains 62 unique symbols arranged in a non-linear fashion. The symbols include abstract shapes, plants, and what appear to be animal forms, which may reflect Olmec religious or cultural themes. Does that remind you of something? Another writing system that is non-directional, which can be written from left to right, from right to left, or from top down. And if you said hieroglyphics, you would be right. The similarities between Mayan and Egyptian hieroglyphs just cannot be attributed to chance. Both use phonograms followed by ideograms to relate meaning. These are pretty much the only languages in history to do so. The odds of that happening independently, randomly, and within the same time period is astronomically impossible. Just for context, other independently developed writing systems in the world look nothing like hieroglyphics. And I am not talking about Chinese kanji, Arabic script, Greek alphabet, or Phoenician alphabet, because these have all been shown to come from Medu Necher, the African hieroglyphics from Egypt. But other...
For all of those people who been arguing, I seen a podcast with this guy. He was a historian, and I knew that he was like he was really a racist, or he just didn't like our people. He was making a point. He was like, man, Greek is the oldest language in the world. That the ancient, all Sanskrit, that's not real. That's trash. He kept calling it ancient. I'm thinking like, but Greek comes from ancient African. No matter how you put it, he was making this argument on this like top-notch podcast. And I was thinking like, yeah, you're a prick, because you clearly got to know that the Greeks are descendants of, right? So I just want to make it clear, like he was trying to say that all alphabet structures come from the Medu Neter or hieroglyphs that came afterwards. So when you hear people that want to argue with you about certain things, once you understand certain points and principles when it's dealing with historical evidence, it's easy to understand when somebody is not as intelligent as they say they are, or they haven't done the research. You know what I mean? Always remember that.
Other systems like the Proto-Saharan script, the Blombos cave markings, or Ensibiti, their properties are very different from hieroglyphics. But it also extends to their numbers. Olmecs happen to have a base 10 number system, just like the Africans in ancient Egypt. They could have chosen a base 20, like the Yoruba in Nigeria, or the Bassa in Cameroon. Or they could have chosen a base 60 like the Sumerians. Or they could have chosen a base 12. Or another unique way of counting. But they happen to have the same counting methods as the Africans from Kemet. And subsequent Mesoamericans, civilizations, had a base 20 number system, which is just an extension or a doubling of the Olmec and Kemetic base 10, even down to the mortuary masks for their dead kings that they also buried in pyramids, in ornately decorated pyramids. Golden masks for dead Mesoamerican kings, golden masks for the pharaohs. Mummification for the Aztec and the Maya, mummification in Egypt, stone sarcophagus for the Mesoamerican kings, stone sarcophagus for Nubio-Kemetic kings, pyramids in Mesoamerica, pyramids in Egypt. And these pyramids share a lot in terms of their dimensions, their orientation, their style, their building technique. To say that this is a coincidence is to be wholly dishonest.
Y'all see this map right here? Before they go forward, this is the map of the natural currents of the Atlantic Ocean. So what they were saying, all Africa had to do was create a boat and they can paddle out to here. Now, if they came from sea at this corner, this is what they learned. They come from here, just like this current will bring you here and bring you straight into South America, right? No paddles. All you have to do is paddle out like 2 miles and get into this current. That's how strong the current is. This current, and you can navigate the boat so where to bring, if you want to come here, it's a current, and you just got to sail your ship in these currents, and it'll bring you here, bottom of America. This one bring you into Florida. This one bring you right here, and you can get out the current if you can control your boats to get out right here by the Carolinas, Jersey, East Coast, right? You see these currents, and this is just showing you this one. The other ones show you it's one current from the bottom of Africa that go to the bottom of South America. But that's what this map is.
Especially in the face of all the other evidence. All of this shows why it is not a miracle that the Olmec civilization just sprang out of nowhere. And it is also not a coincidence that it happened to have emerged on the east coast of the Americas, exactly where the Atlantic currents end. But then, if indeed the first high culture in the Americas was seeded by Africans, surely there must be some remains of them from that period. And this is exactly what we will see in the next section. When Dr. Andrzej Wiercinski studied the remains of Olmec-era Mesoamerica, he was surprised to discover that 13.5% of the skeletons from Tlatilco and 4.5% of the skeletons from Cerro de las Mesas were Africoid. He supports this claim with skeletal evidence from several Olmec sites, where he found skeletons that were analogous to the West African type black. This means that 3,000 years later, we are still able to find skeletal remains that point to a clear and substantial African presence in Olmec country from that era. And this evidence makes sense, because if the Africans came in such numbers, the same Africans that we find in ancient Egypt, as genetic has shown, these Kemetu would have encountered an already existing stock of people living in Mesoamerica. They would have been concentrated in one area, the port of arrival in the Americas, and over the centuries, they would have merged with the existing population.
This figure was quite distinct, and they found in the dry areas of the Olmec world skeletons that could be linked with continental African types, Africoid types. Professor Wiercinski, a Polish skull experts showed that these were African type skeletons.
I mean, look at the heads of the Olmecs kings and compare them to the one in the middle, the head of Taharka, the Egyptian king. How is it even possible to say that these heads are not African, and their features would be seen in the population of the area today? And this is exactly what genetics is showing us.
That the settlement story of the Americas is much more complicated than we've realized.
So the Mesoamericans who have typical African features today don't have them because of similarities with Africans. They have them because the Africans brought these genetic characteristics to the population of the area. But are there any clear signs that Black Africans had contact with and influenced Mesoamerican culture in ancient times?
So my point is, when you see that, so for all of my Hispanic people, understand, if you haven't been told that your roots, because I noticed there was a lot of debates online and all these big forums, and there was millions of comments going back and forth like, you Black people need to stop making up your history. Y'all got enough history. You're slaves. Y'all never did nothing. And I was sharing this on my page so people could see it. You know, they said, and one dude told me, your people ain't never did nothing but work for other people, right? And that mindset, the true racism really exists in the Hispanic culture against us as well, even though they are brothers and don't know their history. Just like we don't know our history and then we got our shit with them. Even to the prison system with the war against the Hispanics and the Blacks, right? The truth is, when you talk about these Dominicans and all of these other races, they got these women. The reason why the Dominican women and Puerto Rican women got these bodies and these features because they got the genetics from the Africans. So I want you to remember that everybody will take from the culture, and people will be happy to take certain things or take out. They would love to have the mind, the attributes, the statue, like in Get Out when he was telling the Black dude, like, yo, damn, you got all the physical, nature gave you all the physical capabilities. But to identify with us, no, we ain't that. But at the end of the day, it was an honor to be around us. And we was teaching, and we brought a lot of information with us, our ancestors. So it's sad to see us being treated how we treated today, but I lack of understanding who we are, we allow it.
In the earliest depictions of the feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, we can see a Mesoamerican man being flown by the serpent and in possession of a very peculiar object. If you look closely, you will see that he is carrying a handbag, and this famous handbag has been seen in almost all significant ancient civilizations outside of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization. Quetzalcoatl was associated with the wind, learning, and the planet Venus. He was considered a patron of priests and a symbol of knowledge and creativity. Quetzalcoatl was often also depicted as a cultural hero who brought agriculture, the calendar, and the arts to humanity. His teachings emphasized the importance of self-sacrifice and humility. The connections here are so obvious that ancient Mesoamerican are essentially telling us that an all-knowledgeable God came to their land, bringing all the elements of civilization. And this matches perfectly the historical records that we see, and all the evidence that we see, that in 1500 BC, a people came to the land with their technology of agriculture, writing, mathematics, life-saving medicine, building techniques, engineering, and so much more. For all intent and purposes, these people were gods to the Mesoamericans, and they recorded them as such. And like any gods, centuries later, they morphed into a legend. Oh, and by the way, if you were wondering what the people who built Göbekli Tepe looked like,
let me say this. What's crazy about that bag is it just hit me. When you look at all the ancient cultures, you will see this bag. You constantly see that carrying a handbag, and you constantly see they got this watch. And we talk about 10,000, 15,000 years ago, they got a handbag and a watch. So it's like the biggest thing they ever did to us was lie to us and make us believe that all this technology we got today, that we're so much more advanced than our ancient ancestors. And that's a lie. That was the biggest trick. They wanted us to believe that to get us to believe that we were the most advanced civilization ever with our technology, and it's the first time. Like, nah, we went backwards. We de-evolved. This handbag is symbolic, yes, it's probably something else. Like everything has a duality. The handbag, they look like it's saying the people that brought information, brought life, brought all of the tools and the gifts, right? And then next to that, then you got the watch, and then we end up now we got pocketbooks, right? And then we got these watches we wear on our wrists. That's how we use them. But for them, the watch is symbolic, and it's probably a real thing because they believe that this watch allowed them to travel long distances like this. And a handbag, it is symbolic, but what else is in it? And why is it on every culture, right? And then why was it sold to us as just a mechanism? Because if we come from ancient cultures where the watch or the handbag would meant something deep to us, when they recreated the watch in the pocketbook, right? Then it was already in our psyche. So that means they sold us, basically manipulated us to buy things that look like the things that gave us power. So you know how men, we wear watches? In ancient statues, all the men wear watches, right? So they I believe they created watches because they know, like as a man, I like watches as well. But they created watches and wrist shit because unconsciously, because it's in our genetics and our historical memory, that's why we so addicted to watches and jewelry. And just like the women, when you see on the wall, they were showing you every civilization holding these bags. That's why women are so addicted to these pocketbooks and Birkin bags and handbags and shit. Because on a deeper level, it's in our historical psyche. And then they sell it to us to keep us. It's like our spirit gets calm when we get these things, but it's really, that's why we keep buying these things over and over, because spiritually and consciously, we kind of know that this bag isn't a bag, but it satisfies the mind because at least the women still got it. But they don't even realize they got a want for something that was anciently created that probably only women know the true meaning of and what it breaks down. And that's why it's deep.
Well, here it is. Flat nose, high cheekbones, strong African features. And this matches what we already know of the Natufians who invented agriculture and who we have shown are clearly black Africans in previous videos. The Natufians are said to have built Göbekli Tepe too. And so, the Mesoamericans recorded these African gods with their many features in their art, down to the dreadlock hairstyles and West African head coverings. That's right, you heard it right. Many of the Olmec heads had dreadlocks, a hairstyle only worn by black Africans and not by the Polynesians. But it's not just the hair, it's also the helmets.
And the kind of flattened base, the brow ridge. And look at the helmet. That's a very peculiar type of helmet. It does not occur anywhere else in America. It has a strap along the face, falling along the ear, and it has a circular ear plug. Those helmets, exact type of helmet.
Think about what I just said about the watch, right? And how they recreated it and sold us to it, because in our culture, apparently it means something to us. That's why we buy so many. And then I told you, you see every civilization around the world, these men, these kings, these powerful rulers got these bags where they talk about, they showing you they basically brought civilization to places, right? But then they sold our women these bags, and then these helmets. And then they sold it, and then in the game of football, which originally was different, the game of basketball and the game of football was ancient in different ways. But the helmets, when we play football, the hats we wear, it's in our psyche. So that's why we think about all the money we spend growing up. We put a hat on our head for some reason, our swag changed. Just like when we put jewelry on, like I said, remember I said years ago, if you want to see that, if jewelry got energy, take a gold chain, take nice silver, take nice jewelry and just put it on a little kid, like even a kid that don't care. Put that gold jewelry and a bracelet on him and watch he walk around the house. He gonna start like, yeah. He gonna start walking different because the energy in his body corrects when you put that jewelry on him. So the point I'm making is this helmet, football, hats, toboggans, it's in our historical psyche, right? And I want y'all to think about what I'm saying to y'all today. In your historical psyche, there's a reason why you like what you like, but you don't realize that the soul is searching for, when we put the hat on, it doesn't satisfy the soul. That's why we buy so many, because spiritually we're looking for it. With the watches, we buy a bunch of watches. Because in our psyche, that watch probably is the thing that allowed us to move around spiritually, and it has so many different meanings. Like the watches of ancient time, they can prove that they told the time, but they also told you the zodiac. They told you time, zodiac information. It could tell you the tide. It told you all of that if you understand how to read it. It was a compass, everything. So when they said ancestors had compasses, they just didn't tell you that they were watches. Think about it. Even today, they were like clocks. So they had a mechanism that did it all in one.
Were found in the Egyptian world in this period. What period? The period that has been dated by carbon-14 datings.
Okay then. If Black Africans were so influential in Mesoamerica, and if they came in such numbers and in so many waves, then there should at least have been a remnant of them when the Europeans arrived in 1498, and the earliest European would have reported them in their earliest voyages. Well, they did. In his journal, Christopher Columbus noted that the indigenous people of Hispaniola reported visits from black-skinned people who arrived from the south and southeast, bearing spears made of a metal called guanin, an alloy of gold, silver, and copper. And as you know, not only is guanin the same name used by multiple West African nations for gold, but when these spears were tested, they had the exact same composition as the spears made in Africa. I wonder how historians explain this one. Oh, right, they don't.
It said guano, but it's also, that's where the word, that's where they get Ghana from. When they told you that the word Ghana means gold, guana, right? So I'm just giving you all the keys. Like he's mispronouncing it a little bit, which is natural. We all, when we see words, but it is really pronounced Ghana, guana, because the H, right? Because we just say Ghana, but it's guana. That means it's the African word for gold, right? That's why Mansa Musa, the richest man in the world, whose name was Abubakari, his nation's empire was called Ghana, the empire of gold. That's why he was the wealthiest man in the world.
Because even though it is in the journal of Columbus himself, this is never explained or mentioned, because it would mean that we would all have to admit that Black Africans were navigating to the New World well before Columbus. But their presence is also seen in Balboa's encounter. In 1513, Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa reported encountering African men in Panama. These individuals were said to be captives of a local chief, leading to further speculation about African presence in the Americas prior to European arrival. And where there are captives, there is a war. Where there is a war, there is a nation.
Hey, yeah, you heard his breakdown. He said this, and the other guy, Balboa, he came to America and seen an indigenous tribe there were descendants, but they weren't Africans. And they had Africans as prisoners of war. In order to have prisoners of war, there has to be a war. And in order for it to be a war, there has to be a nation already in America to be at war with. So the historical evidence is there. When Christopher Columbus came to America, he did express that he's seen Africans when he first went to the islands, because that's where he landed. He went back, told the queen everything, came back, they killed all the men, enslaved the women. But he did take a boat all the way into South America off one of the currents with Moors. And when he went, that's when he was frightened. So that's how we know. Let nobody tell your history wrong. And this is a documentary not made by us, and that's why I say we open-minded. Even when I play you the stuff that's not even intentionally made to give us information, to speak about it in the talk, you accidentally gonna give us some information.
Did you know that documented in the journals of Columbus himself, there is clear account of Africans having already made the voyage to the Americas? And it is from these African sailors and traders that Columbus and the Portuguese would learn to build deep seaworthy ships and learn how to navigate to the Americas.
And there he learned from the Portuguese, who were moving across Africa, who had set up the first fort among Europeans in Africa, that African sailors had actually crossed over the Western Ocean and had found a land mass in the south. This was not what Columbus had found. Columbus found islands, which are now known as the Caribbean islands, but he had not gone on to a continental mass. The Africans had found the actual continental mass. And the Portuguese insisted that this continental mass in the south was 370 leagues, which is about 15 to 1600 miles away, according to whether you count the league as 4 or 4.5. They were.
And all over Africa, prior to the arrival of the Europeans, there was a vibrant and diverse shipbuilding industry. And with those ships, they went everywhere, literally everywhere. But this is again not reported in contemporary media and history books.
There is a profound misunderstanding of African capacity. The Africans had ships. This is one of them. This is in East Africa. This ship, this is just a model which I found in Fort Mombasa in Kenya. This ship is a 70-tonner. Ships like these in the 13th century before Columbus took elephants to China. European shipping is not even European. The sail Columbus used comes out of the Arab-African world. The astrolabe comes out of the Arab-African world. They found in the desert before Columbus.
So you got to remember, historically, the Europeans told the world, like I told you, I went to China and told the Chinese man when they got off their little Santa Maria and the Pinta, them little midget boats, like for real. When you study historically, he said that boat was a 70-tonner. Think about that, 70 tons. They were bringing elephants on boats. We had these conversations before, some of them. Elephants on boats, and they said it was a 70-ton. So historically, we had a boat and ship. The Africans had been around the world. They had circumnavigated and mapped the planet from the skies and the waters 200 times at least before Europe had ever got a boat that we built for them and brought them on the water to teach them.
In the period before Columbus, the Africans were using compasses and nautical instruments to navigate the desert.
The many elephant motifs in Mesoamerican art present a problem for the current historical narrative, given that elephants were not native to the Americas during the periods when these cultures flourished. This anomaly is immediately solved when, number one comes to know that the West Africans had seaworthy ships. Number two, that their ships were more than capable of transporting very large cargo like elephants and giraffes, as documented by the Chinese. And number three, the documented accounts of West Africans making the voyage well before and during the time of Columbus. From this seeding, civilization started to spread throughout the Americas at a frantic rate. LiDAR imagery has shown that all over Central and South America, complex civilizations propping up all over. Megastructures indicative of very large population centers, very well organized, are being found. All of them, now lost to the jungle after disease from the European invaders, wiped out a whole continent, causing collapse after collapse. Really, a great loss to humanity. A humanity that has not recovered from being an intentional destruction of historical artifacts, pointing to a truth that would be too inconvenient for the powers that be. And so, the cover-up continues where evidence is now painted as similarities and coincidences. Where famous pyramids suddenly appear in Mesoamerica in the same time frame when the Africans from the Nubio-Kemetic civilization complex are shown to be present.
Is that the same place and the same time these heads and skeletons and clay portraits appear with Africoid type hair and features and helmets, you have things suddenly occurring in the American world that do not occur before. The first pyramid is built in America in that period. It appears on the very same religious platform where the Africoid heads are found. For the first time, the Americans are making these huge statues when before they were making small things largely out of clay. For the first time, they're working in monumental stone.
Also, the first time in their history, the Americans are suddenly moving massive blocks of stones downriver and working them to an uncanny precision. No one in history had mastered this, except the African in the new.
Because at the time, right, the Africans at the time, what they did that was so important was they had already been through this thousands of years ago about bringing limestone down the Nile, right? And now we know. So if they've been found ways to move large stones and blocks. If we can move large stones and massive ton blocks, he said the shit weighs 70 tons. Some of these stones weigh a ton, 3 tons, 5 tons. So of course they can bring an elephant. That's bringing an elephant on a boat. That's little shit. If we already done figured out how to move massive stone. Now all of the structures in South America are made out of the same material as what's made in Africa, which is limestone. So you got to think about it, right? The exact same materials, the exact same thing. So in true history, the Africans had learned how to move. What's going on, bro? The Africans had learned how to move large quantities of stone. And all of the pyramids, well, I learned that it is some pyramids made out of different material, but in these areas, there's no limestone. There's like a volcanic rock or something. But 90 to 95% of all of the pyramids are made out of limestone. And the fact that that was what they were using intentionally tells me that what we need to be studying is that we're going to look this season and we're going to look to find out about the qualities of limestone. Do it hold energy? Is it electric? What is, because nobody talks about it, right? But all of these civilizations and all these places are built out of limestone. So when he said now that we in the Americas, they're showing you that in South America that the stones, right, that they're using to build is limestone, and now they're bringing limestone by the ton down the East Coast to build these large statues, right? So just think about it. That's how you know. So there's no argument about if Africa is the oldest, because and I tell people, they say, well, how you know? We'll give people that concept. The reason why we don't argue that and nobody argues that is because we haven't dug in America enough, but Africa is the only continent. Let's say there's 20 stages of man that we know. All 20 stages and different types of skeletons are found in Africa, from the oldest to the newest. There is old bones found in other places, but that you just never, there's no other continent or place where they found every stage of man in the ground. So that's why we don't argue that anymore. So just for clarity for everybody.
Nubio-Kemetic civilization, and yet it appears overnight in Mesoamerica at the same time that Black African skeletal remains and Black African pottery and Black African writing methodology happen to all emerge simultaneously in Olmec country. And in that same time period, the Mesoamerican starts to practice skull deformation, a practice from Kemet at the time, as you can see from the depiction of the son of Pharaoh Amenephis IV.
It's crazy that he said it that way, because that's not proper. The proper way to say that so that people understand is called head binding. I don't know if y'all remember this thesis I had, and I stand on this, and I didn't read this anywhere, just something I realized. If the ancient cultures, our cultures, did a practice of binding the skull to make the hair longer, right? And some people say, oh, that's alien. Well, actually, if you study, if the body grows, if everything on the body grows, right? The arms, the legs, the limbs, everything grows. And we wonder why they were so intelligent. Do we not think that they binded the heads to give the skull? Remember, they said that the brain is growing, and even the infant's head is soft. So when they realized that, they started using materials bonding the skull to get it to grow out 30% more. I think they realized that the brain will continue to grow if you give it the space. But just like if you put an animal in a cage, if you put an animal that's supposed to be huge in a small cage for too long, that animal will not grow, because the body knows that you know what I'm saying? The body is intelligent on its own, on all species. So they figured out that if they give the brain more room to grow, remember, so when you, in the future, when y'all see somebody go on lecture or somebody lecture this around the world, this was just something that I thought of naturally. But common sense would tell you that the brain probably needs more room to grow. That's why I think about it. They say we only got access to 10% of our brain because we never let our brains around the world, our brains only evolved to maybe a 15, 16 to 20-year-old. Our brains have not matured or grown in enough space. Why would the brain not function? It's a living organism. Why would it not? That's why we don't have access.
In that same time period, the the Mesoamericans start to incorporate the corbelled vault arches in their architecture. On the right, you can see the picture of a corbelled vault arch from the Red Pyramid near Giza. In the Aztec Codex, one can find a very particular smiting pose depicting a warrior grasping the hair of a submissive captive. On the right, the Narmer palette depicts a pharaoh smiting the enemy. See for yourself.
Hey, what's crazy about this part, with that last one, let me go back a little bit. Oh, no, yeah. Let me go back a tad bit. Right here. So this is, I forgot this pharaoh because I did study this time period. But he has, when you see, they're both Africans, but it's a Greek person. You can tell by his hair, right? But he is captive. This is in like Nubia or Egypt. He captured a Greek person, right? And you see that all of this stuff, he's telling you a story how they captured. And on this one, this is still an African man, right? But you see how he got like Indian clothes? And then he has something, and it looked like it didn't say Latino. But do you see the mixture of right? You see what's going on? Like they got their arm, they sword, they weapon. But do you see that? And it says it. And they even left a right in here for you. But it's telling you. But it's still giving you the same format. This is why when you hear people explaining that they have been lying to us about history, when I'm gonna say it this way, this is what we all have to understand. The reason why this lie and this secret is being told to us and everybody is being quiet is because every nation on planet, what we call races or nationalities, every nation, race, nationality around the planet benefits in our mental oppression. The more that we don't remember or don't know about ourselves, the more that everybody stays in power. Everybody else on a high level, like the people that lead these other cultures, know. We don't know. Remember what Nip and Bro was talking about? They know. They just hope we never found out.
It depicts a pharaoh smiting the enemy. See for yourself. In the Codex Borgia, from south-central Mexico, we can see an initiation scene with baptism by water. On the right, an ancient Egyptian scene from the Temple of Esna, depicting an initiation through baptism by water. The twin serpent motifs, showing up in Aztec and ancient Egyptian iconography. I am sure this is all a coincidence, too. The Mayan half-jaguar and the Egyptian sphinx, both of them sporting the same paws. The sacred Tau cross found in both Mesoamerica and ancient Egypt. To attribute all these cultural similarities to chance is to be wholly dishonest of the truth, especially in the face of genetic, skeletal, archaeological, religious, writing, and mathematic evidence. Oh, and the Tau cross also shows up in Göbekli Tepe. And the similarities go on and on and on, all of them pointing to the same origin, the Black Africans from the Nubio-Kemetic civilization as the initial wave of civilization influence in Mesoamerica, and the multiple subsequent waves from the same stock, but this time from West Africa. I would like to leave you with this last quote from the great teacher himself on the opposition one faces in his life when trying to expose the truth. Quote, "Well, fighting for a new vision of man, a new vision of history, is worth it, painful though it may be. The warrior's courage does not protect him from the wound of bullets. But I have found over time, David, that the negatives have been my greatest help. That is the one lesson I have learned over the years. The negative is very important. Oftentimes, it is more important than the positive. Sometimes, if something is highly successful and meets no great opposition, it can make you facile. If it meets with great negatives, it can be even better in the end." Without History cannot exist without the support of many of you, from sharing the video to your Patreon and YouTube memberships. These help me continue to bring our truth.
A powerful video. I told you we're going to be on America, China, but we really, really going to dig. Now, the next part, which I intentionally brought it here, my dog name is Hatshep. So a lot of people are like, where you get the name from? One of the greatest rulers of Egypt, she ruled better than all the men. She was a woman, but she also ruled as a man. Because I used to always ask my mom, like, well, why would men cut their hair off and wear fake beards? So that tells me first that there's a lot more women playing Pharaoh, right, than they admit. But Hatshepsut was so powerful that what they couldn't do was hide out of history. Now, what I'm showing you in the background, this was in the Valley of the Kings, you know, where they found like King Tut and all them tombs. They never tell you about hers. This is her. This is what she built. She ruled better than men. And this is why I say they got malls from, museums, that idea. She took architecture to another level, but she thrived, right? And so that's why I want to go back, because I know I'm going to go back to what Dr. Ben is and we'll get there. But I want to show you some of this in this Dr. Ben in Africa.
This funerary temple site. This funerary temple was where Ramesses II's corpse was prepared for burial. And Dr. Ben also showed us some Roman arches that weren't built by Romans.
Those are archways for the granary. When the Pharaoh Ramesses II had his complex, for the men who were working here, they had a granary where they could store their food and everything.
What is the significance of looking at this?
The significance is looking at it to see that in architectural and art school today, they teach that these arches are Roman arches and are Greek arches. And these arches existed before there was a Rome or a Greece. Ramesses died in 1232 BC, and Rome or Greece wasn't built until at least 1000 BC.
And then Dr. Ben threw us a curve. In the Valley of the Kings, he showed us a temple for a queen.
Now, Queen Hatshepsut is one of the few women who were pharaohs.
The only woman who ruled as a pharaoh. Other women ruled as queen, but she's the only woman to rule as a queen and a king simultaneously. She claimed she was not born of an ordinary person, but she was the daughter of a god and a goddess. And that gave her the right to rule as a king and as a queen.
What god did she worship? Did she recognize Ra?
Yes, Amun-Ra, everyone. The only person who did not worship Ra per se was Akhenaten, but everybody did. Amun-Ra, she said, was her father.
One of the wonders of this temple of Hatshepsut is where it was selected, because it's in sort of a cove, isn't it?
It is right up against the mountain. If you went inside, you will find that it goes into the mountain. This is the hypostyle hall of the chapel. The chapel is in that door where you can't go in.
Did y'all hear what Dr. Ben just said? When you think about Mount Rushmore, I'm going to go back to it, but when Mount Rushmore, behind the president, it's a door. You can't see it unless you're in the sky. There's a door that go into the mountain. Hatshepsut. So when you think, and I'm going to go back to show y'all, when you think it's just a building, the rest of it is in the mountain, yo. Let me go back. Wait, we're going to show it. This mountain back here, this goes into this mountain. So that's why they don't, and for the record, you can't go in. So they won't even let you go in, but it's so much more inside the mountain. So I want y'all to just imagine.
The few women who were pharaohs.
The only woman who ruled as a pharaoh. Other women ruled as queen, but she's the only woman to rule as a queen and a king simultaneously. She claimed she was not born of an ordinary person, but she was the daughter of a god and a goddess. And that gave her the right to rule as a king and as a queen.
What god did she worship? Did she recognize Ra?
Yes, Amun-Ra, everyone. The only person who did not worship Ra per se was Akhenaten, but everybody did. Amun-Ra, she said, was her father.
One of the wonders of this temple of Hatshepsut is where it was selected, because it's in sort of a cove, isn't it?
It is right up against the mountain. If you went inside.
Ain't my fault. Sometimes it blocked me out. The only thing that I was saying to make it quick was saying that Hatshepsut ruled at a time where if she worshiped Amun-Ra, that's later in Africa, because in Africa, on a historical level, the people from the oldest people, they worship Ra, which is the sun, right? And then the people from the top of Africa, right, they worship Amun. It got to a point where there was a pharaoh who learned how to unite it, so they just started worshiping Amun-Ra, the sun and the moon, as one, right, as equal, like a man and a woman, the feminine and the masculine, like together, the duality. He brought it together, and so we have to know that Hatshepsut, after like the 11th dynasty, when she's past after we get into like other stuff, when we get past like the 6th dynasty, we start bringing in ancient Africans who came back but were mixed. She's later in this, but she is African, the African mixture, just like Alexander, right? His statues, he's built in black stone. He has features, right? I always tell y'all this. Hatshepsut, she tells you she's African, but you can tell historically that we need to understand these things, but she built, and it's very important that we understand the concepts of understanding that she's a descendant of a foreign African type descendants, right? But not really just a descendant of a true African. Now, of course, that doesn't take anything from her, but we need to understand it's not like once we get past a certain number of pharaohs, we're dealing with Greeks, dark-skinned Romans, dark-skinned people from Samaria, right? They're not like just homegrown Africans completely, if y'all get what I'm trying to say. Because these were people that left Africa a long times ago, but met other human types and mixed, right? And then they came back 1,000 years later, 800 years later, 3,000 years later. And by then, the civilizations don't even, you know what I mean? That's what we got to understand.
You will find that it goes into the mountain. This is the hypostyle hall of the chapel. The chapel is in that door where you can't go in. You used to be able to go in, but you can't go in anymore.
So all of this was enclosed at one time?
Oh, yes.
It had a ceiling?
Oh, yes, and had a ceiling. It's like a hypostyle hall.
I see.
And you notice the ramp up. It ramps up.
Yes, yes, yes.
It was high.
It goes high up to the Up.
It went right in there.
Right. It
We
go up
can't
higher.
get in there now.
No, and behind that door was the signature of her architect, Samut, which they got a rumor. I want to emphasize, rumor. There's no written proof that she had an affair with her architect.
Holy of Holies is in the back?
Well, no. If you could use as a shrine, there's no Holy of Holies. This is a funeral temple.
I see. There wouldn't be. I understand.
You could look to the right, to the left there. You will see it. And then in every one of these columns, you see the Hathoric head and all four sides.
Who is this up here
Where?
on the next level?
That's her husband, Thutmose II.
That's Thutmose.
You see, her father, you got to know a little history about her, how great she was. When the Hyksos were here, that's the first foreign conquerors of Egypt.
She stood up to them?
They came from Asia, around the Oxus River. They came and destroyed the 13th dynasty and started the 14th. By the time of the 17th dynasty, people here, kings from here, a man by the name of Amus I, got mad and organized the forces against the Hyksos.
To drive them out.
He got killed on the battlefield, and his son, Thutmose I, took over.
Continued the fight.
Continued the struggle. He got killed on the battlefield. His daughter, who took after him, took over above the second because you were too young. She took over the battle and pursued the Hyksos.
That daughter would be Hatshepsut.
Makari Hatshepsut.
She was a rough lady.
She was a strong woman. She brought women.
She did a thing. And so I realized I could tell they hit me and let me know my mic was off. Hatshepsut, and what I'm saying is that when I'm talking to y'all about ancient Asia and China, and when I told you that they come from ancient Africans who already had that look, and they went over there and then they conquered and they built dynasties in China and Asia. They came back to Africa. Now, I told you already, when you're dealing with 1 through like 10, 11, 12, you're dealing with people of darker descent, but also ancient Africans or their descendants coming back. But that's when the rule started, after like 10, 11, 12. He's saying that her people were called the Thutmoses, but they were Hyksos. That's Asian. These are still black people. And they said Moses is from Chaldea. That's in Asia. Right? So that's another proof that the holy bloodline also comes from out of Asia, Africans from that area. So that's why we got to ask why the Moors come from a line off of the ancient Africans and the ancient Chinese, who are actually some of the oldest people on earth. Right? So she ruled off of that. Right? And when you get out of that, I believe they said that empire, when that changes, like the Ptolemies, the Thutmoses, and all of those, they give it to you. Thutmose is the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 2nd. When they stopped going by those names, that's when somebody else came in and ruled. Historically, they saying that they came in and took over. They beat the 13th dynasty, right? Which I believe it's either the Greeks or the Persians who had conquered. And they were Africans. African types, and then they conquered, and then that's when they took over, and that's what they tell you. And then when they came in and they tried to rule her, when they got rid of her father, she chased them out, and that's how she got the respect. And if y'all get what I'm saying, it's very important to understand the influence of Asia and China into Africa and to, more importantly, to who we are as the people in America and our true connections to the ancient people of the now and the ancient people of China, and how that connects to the Moors and how that connects to us in America.
Men in the government in certain positions, but she did not allow women to interfere with the priesthood, to go into the priesthood. They developed their own system called the priestess, but they were not allowed to participate with the men. Yes. A Nubian queen, plus the fact, Gil, she started what is today called women liberation. Oh yeah, brother. Today we call women's liberation movement. She had done it thousands of years before.
Amen. That's what I like. There are 62 tombs here that are known of. Perhaps the best known of which is the all but vacant tomb of Tutankhamun. Best known because the boy pharaoh's tomb was discovered intact in the early 1900s. Egyptians working under an Englishman named Howard Carter came.
You see how they said it differently? That's King Tut. We call it Tutankhamun, but he said it the proper way. But that's King Tut they talking about.
Quite by accident, upon a few steps leading downward, this in November of 1922. Carter was contacted and he ordered the digging to continue. They found the tomb of King Tut, a sensational find. The treasures of this tomb were brought out into daylight for the first time in thousands of years. Works of solid gold, alabaster, and other precious minerals, fashioned into exquisite works, intended not for the eyes of the living, but to accompany the young king on his journey to the afterlife. Then Dr. Ben and I took a look at the tomb of Ramesses IV.
If you look at the ceiling, Gil, you see there are different examples from the papyrus, the very papyri you see, like the papyrus of Ani and so forth. And the wall quotations from the various holy books. Goddess Ma'at to recite the 42 admonitions to her, otherwise called the negative confessions. From which came 10 of them is called the 10 Commandments. Moses supposed to have gotten it on Mount Sinai, but I don't know how he could get that when it was already been taught to everyone in Egypt at the education center at Luxor. Luxor was then called what Set. The Greeks came and changed that name to Thebes. The Arabs came and changed it to Luxor.
What we're not looking at, though, is the architectural achievement. This passageway and this whole tomb is cut into the side of a mountain.
It's cut into the side of a mountain, and then it is smoothed, then it is carved, and then painted into the beautiful colors you see here.
Wait, they had to know what they were doing as far as tolerance.
They had architects and engineers. This wasn't haphazard guesswork.
And what is this? What is this? The tomb?
Sarcophagus, and where the body was put into, hermetically sealed. That's the big one, and there was a smaller one inside of that big one. So plus the wrappings that the body was in, and kept the body for thousands of years.
And this is the tomb of Ramesses IV.
Ramesses IV, one of the Ramesside kings.
The Valley of the Kings looks down on a flatlands area that is almost level with the Nile River. And in this area stands the huge colossus of the pharaoh Amenhotep III. This pharaoh sired a son who would have a major impact on the religious concepts of succeeding civilizations, because this son, Amenhotep IV, also known as Akhenaten, formulated the concept of one supreme god, known as monotheism. These gigantic colossus were carved out of a single piece of sandstone. Dr. Ben and his accompanying guide talk to me about these colossus.
Why are these colossus so far away from the Valley of the Kings?
Yes, they were in front of the temple, the funerary temple. At that time, being 18th dynasty, they have been constructed temples so far to mislead the grave robbers.
Tell me something. Do you ever have the feeling that they haven't found all the tombs?
They found the 62 of one period, but there are other pharaohs missing of other periods.
And nobody knows where they're buried?
No, they could be anywhere in Egypt because...
digging in Egypt by luck, by chance, like Howard Carter has been discovered, King Tut by luck.
But sheer luck. As a matter of fact, it was Sheikh Abdul Rahman, his father was the one that found the tomb, and Howard Carter get the credit.
The credit, yes.
Is it true what they're saying, that Howard Carter turned out to be a grave robber himself?
All of them.
That he kept some of it for himself?
All of them kept for themselves. And they sold to museums, and they kept for themselves and they sold to museums. But they blame the people who were equally robbing the tombs. But when they robbed the tombs, they didn't keep the monuments, the artifacts to themselves. Somebody got it, and they don't have it, so somebody got it.
Dr. Ben told us that most tombs and funerary temples, where the bodies are readied for burial, were located on the west bank of the Nile because the sun sets in the west. On the east bank were the temples of worship for the living, such as those directly opposite the Valley of the Kings, one of which is the largest worship temple ever built. Just wait till you see it. The Valley of the Kings on the west bank of the Nile in the city of Luxor. This hour begins on the east bank, where Dr. Ben took us to two important temples in Luxor, one of which is described by Dr. Ben as the largest temple ever built, anywhere, at any time, as you will see. Of the two temples first.
These were built by three main pharaohs. The first was Amenhotep III, then his son Akhenaten, then Ramesses II.
All right, now, as we turn around, we will see the main entrance to this temple that this walkway leads into.
This was the training temple for the priests. Here was where men came at age 7. He remained for 40 years.
40?
Yes, to complete. The training of the priest took 40 years. One could not be a priest unless he was 47.
What could entail such a long period of study?
He learned the 7 liberal arts, engineering, science, mathematics, medicine, law, theology, you name it. The people didn't come here. They didn't come in here for anything. Only the priests came in here, the young training priests. The Colossus is Ramesses II.
Both of them?
Yes.
So he had a hand in this too?
Oh, he built this section. He built from where the Colossus is to the front. Aha. He added this section on. Right. This section that changed, you notice the angle of the main access line.
Now, beyond these colossus, we see these long, tall columns.
Hypostyle hall, the hall of columns.
And what is that? What went on in there?
That's the aisle to go through.
Just the passageway?
The passageway.
What was the relationship between the priest and the pharaoh?
The priest was, the chief priest was the advisor of the pharaoh, and the priests were under the domination of the chief priest, not the pharaoh. They related to the chief priest.
So these priests had a lot of power.
Yeah, they were the people of knowledge. They advised the aristocrat or the pharaonic system. They were the head of the educational system, which the Greeks call the mystery system.
Now again, I see this passageway begins to ascend, which means we're headed towards the Holy of Holies.
Yes, in a sense, that is true in its total sense. However, this particular chamber doesn't move you directly into the Holy of Holies.
Not yet. No, but I can see up ahead.
Yes, you go into the colonnade. the court of colonnades, the court of the priests, where the priests assemble those in training, and they would walk around these colonnades. You see columns on 3 sides, double columns, where there's a walk. It's called the colonnade of the priests.
Now these columns are fluted.
These are fluted papyrus column, as you see in front of you. Yes. This is the Holy of Holies. When the early Christians came in and occupied this, they painted scenes from the Christian religion. Look at on the wall. Some of them are still remaining. You can see some of the scenes.
But I can see some of the scenes, yes.
Right. And all of they painted this also.
And they did it over the original.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I see.
You could see some of it is gone now, and they painted over the originals. When we start to enter here, you see certain quote-unquote Gothic arches with the early Christian used. They took, look at that piece of column where it's upside down. Look at the foot, the legs. They didn't worry even how they put it. That's upside down. They used the stone from another temple.
What about this this concave entranceway here? Who built that?
That was done during the Roman time. They tried to make the imitation of what the Romans had developed by this time. And they put that there.
What the Africans had developed by this time.
But what the Africans had developed, they added to it.
I see.
When we left the Luxor temple, Dr. Ben and I walked down a long avenue of sphinxes with ram's heads that once connected the Luxor temple to the awesome temple of Karnak. So huge and beautiful, it's difficult to describe.
It is a temple that started way back in the 12th dynasty.
Under which pharaoh?
They are not certain. However, it was resumed. Work was resumed on it in the 18th dynasty by Amenhotep III.
Okay, now this is the main entrance, and these are the figures of
Amun-Ra.
In the form of a ram's
head, a lion body. Standing between the 2 paws is God Amun-Re.
And this is the main entrance, my God.
It's the main pylon. As you notice, these stone, the pylon, this thing was even touched good. Because you see the rough stone, see? There was rough stone all over, see? Now, this is done this side more than that side. But even so, there's hardly any work done comparatively because they had to smooth out this temple here. And
why?
Because the work, you place the stone in place first, then you do the finished work.
And they never got to do that?
They never got to do it.
Okay.
I mean, it'll take another century for them to finish this temple.
This is one huge temple.
Yes, it's the largest worship temple in the entire world. You can take St. Patrick's Cathedral, St. John the Divine, both in New York. You could take the Canterbury Cathedral. You could take the St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. All of them and put them together and run almost the Indy 500 and still got room. See, look, as far as your eye can see.
Now, what is this? This is the first courtyard.
This is the first courtyard. That was the mud ramp that as you
carried the rocks up.
As you go up, you lengthen the ramp. And you can you carry up the rocks up there.
Could it be then that this is the same way the pyramids were made?
Exactly. The construction to build very high, they did it by ramps. You keep the same angle, so as you go higher, you lengthen the ramp. That you keep the same angle.
Okay, now let's talk about some of these things. There's a huge column here. What is that?
These columns were built by Tihaka, the pharaoh that came here from Ethiopia. one of the Ethiopian pharaohs.
I see. Now, guarding the entranceway, there are two statues, and they represent death.
This one represents life.
Life. That
one represents death.
Of which person?
Ramesses II.
Ah, there he is again.
That's right.
All right. And then there, of course, is the ram's head with the lion's
ram's
body
head,
all the way around.
Same as the ram's head you saw outside.
And this is an anteroom.
No, that's the temple of God Amun. The specific temple. See, the whole thing is the great northern temple of Amun. But that particular one is the temple, specific temple of Amun himself.
So this temple is huge, but it is a conglomeration of many temples.
Right.
All right, now when we leave this enormous courtyard and walk down here, what are we going to see?
Well, we go into the Hypostyle Hall. You're going to see 134 columns, 50 feet tall each, and about 7 to 8 feet in diameter.
God.
All stone. You're going to see all kinds of carvings in it, but in particular here, Gil, right up there, you see God Min that I spoke to you about.
Yes.
Here is it. And on every one of these 134 columns, you'll be looking at God Min. Everywhere, the god of fertility. And elsewhere, he dominates this because Ramesses II, though he followed many, he followed Akhenaten father. Akhenaten father was the first in the 18th dynasty to continue this temple.
These columns supported a ceiling. This was enclosed at one time.
Yes. If you will notice, there is a low ceiling and there is a high ceiling.
Yes.
At that section was the low ceiling, and you would notice, right, looking between these two columns, you would see a kind of grid pattern going from the low column on top. That you see the column here, the beam across.
Yes.
Then you see built up is the grid pattern to the higher column. That allow you to get light in at the side. And both there were roofs. There was the low roof and the high roof.
And there's some of the original colors.
Oh yes, and you would see the original columns under that beam. And you should see some of the original color under this beam. At least a little piece there. There is it. See?
Yeah.
We're holding this. And then you see original color under that beam over there also at the high
Tell
roof.
me something. Why do some columns end when scoop out like a flower and then some are straight up?
Because some of the work wasn't finished. And this is the papyrus form column. You got to, because this is in the south, the column, the capitals of the column are made like a lotus flower. When you go to the north, the capitals of the column are made like papyrus, unless they got what they call the mix capital, where they integrate both papyrus and lotus or other design.
And you know what's also astounding is how well laid out these columns are.
Oh yes. If you went
look at that line there, it's perfect.
Yes, but if you went in the center here, you would notice that if you went in the center here, you would notice again. If you went in the center here, you would notice a complete from the end of the building to the other end of the building.
Right down
there's a straight through.
Perfectly aligned.
Just as this one, it forms somewhat of a cross.
Yes.
You go straight down through the entire temple. That would be west to east, or you go down from north to south, the entire temple.
Amazing. Just amazing. This is about 6 stories tall.
Well, 50 feet, 5 feet per 10 foot is a floor. From floor to floor is 10 feet, and that's one floor. You got 50 feet, that's 5 floors.
5 stories.
5 stories.
No mortar.
No mortar. If you notice there's a good example of the original column, the face there. There's no mortar. The joints are perfectly as if they were sanded.
When we were at the Ramesseum, we were looking at one of the bases.
Yes.
And there was a little hole.
A key.
And that's a key.
A key.
And that was used to anchor.
That was to anchor the stone. Just in the event of hurricane, earthquake, that if it didn't shake, it would move. It would act as if it was one solid piece.
So you're looking at master engineers, master architect.
Oh yes,
master craftsmen
of their period, and up to today they would be masters.
And a magnificent religion.
Oh yes,
religious philosophy of peace.
These were the founders of religious philosophy used today by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They have not gone beyond it. They're still using the fundamentals that were established along the Nile and best expressed here in this temple. Yes.
In addition to the religious theology that was embodied here, there's just a sense of peace and tranquility that is absolutely overwhelming.
Of a god for whom this magnificent temple was named.
That is a relief of God Amun-Re, holding an ankh in his left hand. The ankh is the symbol of the key of life, and in his right hand he has the highest symbol of office, the was scepter. In front of him is Ramesses II, the pharaoh, giving him a gift of something to drink.
Now these are awesome obelisks.
Yes.
Which is a Greek name, is it not?
Yes, it means a needle-like pyramid. In fact, you notice on the top, shapes like a pyramid. And that used to be coated with silver and gold.
Really?
Yes, they call it electron.
Are these two related in any way as far as religion is concerned? Or?
Yes. That one is the column.
The one on the right?
Yes, the obelisk of Makari Hatshepsut.
Yes.
And this is of her son-in-law, Thutmose III.
It's the same Hatshepsut queen who we saw, right?
That's she reigned at 1580 to 1450 something.
Where was this granite brought from?
Aswan, which is about 4.5 hours drive from here, south.
4.5 hours drive.
Yes, by automobile.
And there was no driving in those days.
No, well.
So they brought it up on barge.
It came up on the boat.
Somehow they got it out of the quarry.
Out the quarry.
Got it down to the river.
Down to the river.
Put it on a barge that was large enough. This is one piece.
That's
one
right.
Solid
one
piece.
solid monolithic piece.
How much does it weigh, would you say?
Oh, I mean, a few thousand tons.
What does the shape of the obelisk represent?
It represents a tapered penis. Frankly, it goes back to the story of Isis, using the Greek name. Aset would be the Egyptian name. Put in erecting a symbol of her husband's penis, because her husband, Asar, or otherwise called Osiris, was murdered by his brother, Said Typhon, it was also Aset's brother.
That's that story we saw on the wall.
Right.
With the hippopotamus.
Right. And when he was murdered and cut up into 14 pieces, she went and find the pieces symbolically around the wall, but could not find one piece, the penis, because his brother had thrown that piece in the Nile, and the Nile catfish ate it. So she had them built or cut an obelisk to remind those who had persecuted and murdered him of his penis, so that whenever they go, they'll always have to see his penis.
I see.
You would notice that it's George Washington Memorial in Washington, D.C. is a copy of this.
So what are you saying to me?
That it's a symbol of his penis.
Not George's, but
George, the President of the United States, the obelisk is symbolic of the penis regardless of who got one. It has one meaning. Now, why?
I wonder what George would say.
Well, you know why? Every member of the United States, original Congress, and members of the cabinet of the United States, the first cabinet, was a Mason except one man, Benjamin Franklin, because he was a Quaker.
What does that have to do with what we're talking about?
The symbols they used for setting up the United States was based upon the Masonic order, which they copied from here, the 22 tablets that was stolen from here by England. They used those tablets and take for instance.
And is the pyramid included in some,
yes.
The obelisk?
The pyramid and the money, like you said it.
And the obelisk?
The obelisk, the ever-seen eye, which they call some funny name for it. The pyramid, the sunburst, is symbolic of God Amun-Ra and Ra. The goddess Ma'at at the Supreme Court building with the scale, only that the scale with Ma'at is level. The scale in the United States up and down, not just this, but just this, not just this.
Okay.
And so on.
Chamber here that we are in. What are these two figures here, Dr. Ben?
Well, the figure on your left is Tutankhamun, and the figure on your right is his wife, the daughter of Akhenaten. She was the fifth daughter Akhenaten of Tutankhamun.
How can you tell this was King Tut?
Well, in this case, because I happen to know the question of the statue, although there is no cartouche for me to follow at this particular point. But at one time, there was a cartouche on the body.
So even though he was a teenager, he had a wife?
Oh, yes. He was married to, Akhenaten married him to his daughter before he mounted the throne.
Just a quick word about features. Full lips, apparently wide nose.
It was
Was this an artistic concept, or is this an approximation of how the man looked?
The artist must have been running through this country, because that concept is going on a lot of statues.
Okie dokie. Now, what's this? I see that the
Holy of
walkway
Holies.
goes up,
You
so
notice
it
that
must be...
the flow started to ramp up. And as soon as the flow started to ramp up, you start to question yourself, I am going to the Holy of Holies.
This is a place that you don't believe in going into.
I do not go into holies. I pay the reverence as I would not go into a modern synagogue, a modern church, a modern mosque in the Holy of Holies. I show it the respect.
You wouldn't walk on the altar of certain churches.
No, sir.
This is the
No, sir. I don't have to pray like the people who it belong to, but I show them the respect.
What is this?
This is based upon a calendar. The ancient Egyptians, how they were able to put numbers. 2, 1, 2, 3.
3.
10, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24.
24.
24 again. 33. 32.
I see.
100, 200, 10, 20, 30. 230. 220.
Now, how is this used?
Well, it was used to add.
Like a calculator?
Oh, yes. This was used as a calculator, and it was generally based upon months or something. They did the addition. They had to deal with how much grain, how much tons of this and tons of that, and that was the mathematical way of doing numbers.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take you to put all of this together?
In my head? I guess a few years.
A few years?
Yeah, you don't.
A few decades.
You don't know when you're getting it, when it's coming into you.
Well, what do you say to somebody who's looking at this program that we're doing and their head begins to swim? What do you say to them about how they can hope to deal with this?
My advice would be, don't get perturbed. It's a process of education and it takes time.
It took time to build and it took time to understand.
It took more time to build it than it would take time to understand it. Now we are going to the temple of Thutmose III. Yeah, I hope.
What?
The painting of Jesus.
Oh.
And Joseph and Mary. The Christians use this temple.
This faded figure here is supposed to be of Jesus?
Of Jesus with the wrong thing around his head, I think.
So this was co-opted by?
This was made a Christian temple. Look at the other. Look at the other. Are you going to see more? Here. You see it? There.
Yes, I see it.
That's the statue of God, the triad of the temple. God, Amun-Re, his son, Khonsu, God Khonsu, his wife, Goddess Nut, the holy triad, which the Christians copied and called the Trinity. You look at the top of the column, see some still color, and you see Jesus, Joseph, and Mary, and you see where they copied it from. They cut that up to make it look like a crucifix, the early Christians. Not only did they...
How do you know this?
Well, because we have the evidence of the paintings there.
I see.
We have the evidence of the cutting of the thing by here is the point itself. These were statues, as you see. They didn't even finish because they didn't finish cutting off the neck and head of the one to the right. And we have the experience of all the other temples that they occupied.
Since Dr. Ben has been coming here for the last 50 years, sometimes as many as 6 times a year, just about everybody knows it.
Dr. Ben, brother.
Hi, brother.
How are you, brother?
My brother.
How are you? How are you? I've seen you. How are you? Good?
Tamam. How are you? Good.
How are you?
Good.
Good morning. Welcome.
Oh, see you again.
Welcome to Upper Egypt.
Who was this lake built for?
For the priests.
And who built it? Under what reign? Or dynasty?
Oh, this lake was built during the 18th dynasty under the reign of Amenhotep III.
And what is the purpose of this lake?
So that the priests could clean themselves. The priests in every ritual have to take a bath. Anything that he does in the temple, and anytime he enters the temple, he must wash himself before going. Anytime he eat, he must wash himself before putting in food in a dirty body.
Was there such a thing as a priestess?
Yes, but they didn't come here. They had their own temples, and they did not deal with these worship temples.
Now on the left here, I see some steps over on the left side of this lake.
Yes, that's
where they step down to do their bathing.
Could come down and go up. Yes.
Let's ride north to see 2 temples. En route, there was some time to sort out and digest all that this man, Dr. Ben, had shown us. It took almost 2 hours to reach our first site, the temple at Abydos.
But I know she had to fall. I know it was going to happen.
Yes. Hello.
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 Go on your foot.
We don't need that, Al.
42 steps.
Yeah?
Yeah, you could count 42 risers. This was built originally by Pharaoh Setai I. It was extended by his son, Ramesses II. What you are seeing here, this section was built by Ramesses II. And then
there's that name again.
Everywhere. You're going to see him everywhere. There is Ramesses showing you his father also and himself and the god Osiris.
This was just a place of worship for him.
It was more than that, because when we go outside in the back and up to the rear, it is where Osiris is supposed to have been buried.
Oh, really?
The god of resurrection. It is here that
the one who was cut up in pieces.
Yes, with the back of the temple of Setai I.
All right.
And sitting on the exit and egress and ingress temple of Osiris.
All right. Now, what happened to Osiris? And when you say egress, that means go out.
Yes.
That means he went out through this tunnel here.
Right.
What happened that led him to go out through that tunnel?
He was murdered for the second time and completed his stay in the world, as you know it, and went to the netherworld.
Well, let me take you back a bit. For those who may be confused when you say he was murdered a second time. What was the first murder?
He was hanged by his brother.
Yes.
His wife, goddess, Aset, appealed to God Ra. God Ra gave him the power to bring him back. She and the god of death, Ampu, otherwise called Anubis. He came back and the brother heard that he was back again. The brother came and killed him for the second time. This time cut him up into 14 pieces.
As depicted on that wall.
Right.
All right. And he somehow, he survived that.
Yes, his wife again, with Ampu, went, got him, reconstructed the body, but the one piece was missing, his penis, which had been thrown in the Nile River and eaten by the Nile catfish.
All right. So with this missing member, what happened?
She again went to God Ra. Ra resurrected, gave him back his penis, resurrected his penis, and allowed him to make the virgin birth, immaculate conceived child, Horus, his son, Heru.
With who? Out of who?
With Aset, Isis.
All right.
Then he left and went back for good. Through that tunnel, into the mountain, to the next world, where he will remain and judge.
How far does this passageway lead?
Into the inner world, into the inner hills, into the inner mountain. No one knows where the end is.
Nobody knows, huh?
No one knows. Nobody have been there. People have tried to go, but they have not been successful in reaching the end of it. Many people have gone in there, but turned back. They keep going and going and went too far.
It's tough going. I can see that because you got mountains out there.
All right. It is believed that it is somewhere in the middle of the mountain. I don't know. I've been in about 20 feet and give up. I didn't plan to go in more than that anyhow.
Wow. Is it as close as inside the pyramid?
The feelings make you feel, because you understand that it's supposed to lead you to nowhere that you're going to find an end. Psychologically, in my case at least, you give up because you realize it's getting darker and darker, but it's providing electric light in there.
Well, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take your word for it, and I'm not going to go down. I'll just take your word for it, okay?
I appreciate that.
Me too.
In other words, you're called like me.
But for our last temple site,
This is the temple, the worship temple of goddess Het Heru or goddess Hathor at Dendera.
Who built this temple and when?
This temple was built by the Africans quite a long time ago, however. On the foundation of the existing temple, the Greeks came and added a portion of a temple, and then the Romans came and finished it.
Oh.
It was dedicated to goddess Het Heru, otherwise called Hathor.
What dynasty originally built this?
Oh, this was started in the 25th dynasty. However, it was completed and made a total in the 30th and 31st dynasty, the last.
Oh, so this is towards the end.
This is the end.
Uh-huh.
On the top of the column where the beam is sitting on, you see, that's best.
Who's depicted at the top there?
On the top relief, starting from left to right, is Cleopatra, Caesarean, goddess Hathor, and the king, and Horus.
I see. And on the next level down?
On the left level down again, the same. That's the same thing.
Well, wait a minute. Isn't that Hathor seated in the middle there?
Yes, but she's seated on the top with a different crown. And the second level is Isis. Look at the throne.
I see. Oh, you've got me faked out. And I noticed all the faces on these huge, immense.
Is Hathor. Goddess Hathor. It is a possible one that you could have seen the face there. Possibly.
Just for the benefit of the camera, when the camera pans down, I just want viewers to see the enormity of these pillars.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes when these things are shown on video, without the human form to give you a sense of perspective, you don't realize how huge this is.
You're 50 foot.
This is 50 feet. Lord have mercy.
of all the pharaohs, queens, gods, and goddesses we heard about, some names stood out.
Everywhere you go, you're going to see something about Ramesses. To me, Ramesses II was the greatest king in terms of action. He was a 19th dynasty king. He ruled for about 67 years. He lived till he was about 97, 98 years old. Had a number of wives and children. I wouldn't attempt, like many, to number them because I am not satisfied of any number that was left us. But Ramesses, because of the length of time and his activity as an engineer and so forth, an active man, he had more statues, more temples, more anything that he did, some of which people blame him or putting his name on other people's artifacts or whatever. And so you're going to see him everywhere. I was surprised.
But that seems to be the practice. I mean, as you took us up and down the Nile with these and looked at these temples, we began to see that there were almost every temple was improved or enlarged or expanded on by succeeding dynasties that followed.
Yes, almost every temple had a previous, the one that you see had a previous temple there upon which foundation it sits. And many times the old temple walls are still way beyond, it was much larger than the temple that you were in at that particular time.
And since Ramesses lived longer, he had more time.
He had more time to cover more ground.
So he put his personality on everything up and down the Nile.
And so why waste material to build a new wall when he could use the existing one?
There are a couple other pharaohs that we hear mentioned quite often. This pharaoh Akhenaten.
Though Akhenaten lived one mini fraction of the time that Ramesses did. His impact on society, his impact on Judaism, Christianity, Islam. For example, this one man changed the religion or the worship, I prefer the term worship than religion per se, of the entire nation of Egypt. He left no doubt that the ancients believed in a common deity, a god. He changed it from the worship of the great god Amun-Re-Ora, and with subordinate gods with different names, to the worship of one deity alone by the name of Aten, A-T-E-N, using the same symbol, the disk of the sun, but adding thumbs, elongated thumbs to it. Thus, the beginning of monotheism. He died before Moses was born and preached monotheism. The same Akhenaten preached nonviolence. Long before anybody around today talking about nonviolence, he had spoken about it and lived it. He brought his cousin Sementari to do the administrative work of the government they had two kings, while he concentrated on peace with other neighboring states. To prove it, he decommissioned most of his officers, reduced the size of the Egyptian armed forces to the point where Egypt was almost defenseless against its enemies. He weakened Egypt. This man of the arts and everything like that was the name Amenhotep IV. Otherwise, he changed his name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten. Hatshepsut built her tomb. That's one of the objections they have with her. She got in trouble in the Valley of the Kings.
Which is right over there.
Yes, but she was a queen who declared herself equally Pharaoh, Queen Pharaoh, and thought she had the right to bury in the Valley of the King because she served in the career of a king, and that she was born not of ordinary man, that she was born of an immaculate conception and virgin birth to god Amun and goddess Hathor.
So that was a controversial position to take.
Yes, but showing you that there was a concept of the virgin birth and immaculate conception long before Mary and Jesus and so forth. That virgin birth thing is nothing new.
Then it was back to Cairo. In nearby Giza, literally a stone's throw away from those three awesome pyramids, stands the world-renowned Great Sphinx.
The Sphinx is supposedly the statue of the second, person who is buried in the second period, Khafra. But that is just one view. It is, however, a remaining part of the quarry that gave to the pyramids the stones that you saw cut there.
It's the leftovers.
The leftover. And out of that, the Sphinx has cut. It is the head of a pharaoh, or that pharaoh, the body of a lion.
Dr. Ben has often said that when Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt and came upon the Sphinx, he ordered that its head be blown off. 21 rounds of cannon fire hit the Sphinx, defacing it. This, it's been said, is the origin of the 21-gun salute. There are many views on why Napoleon found the head of the Sphinx offensive. What do you think? Actually, the Sphinx is part of a complex of sites here, all having to do with the burial of the pharaoh. Alongside the Sphinx, you can see a temple. It's called a valley temple. There it is coming up on the lower left. This is where the funeral rites began. Inside that temple, Dr. Ben showed us columns which he said were made of the same granite once encasing the pyramids.
And this is what the whole face of all three pyramids was like.
This is all, but at the bottom. But to me, the feat is this. You fly from here to Aswan at least 1 hour, generally 1 hour and 15 minutes. Figure that they're coming down by river. no motor to bring all this material here. They have to quarry it in Aswan and then bring it here. And they didn't finish there. They bring it, put it in place and finish it. People think that they do all the carving and everything at a place and bring it up, put it up. No, they put up the stone and did the carving after that. The Pharaoh died, okay? He dies. They have to take him and wash him and do the rituals. Then the opening of the mouth ceremony, right? But they don't perform the rest of the performance. They must ritualize him in the Valley Temple.
The body of the pharaoh was taken up this causeway to the mortuary temple, where the mummification took place. Vital organs were removed and placed in special jars. So was the blood. A tedious process would preserve the corpse indefinitely if undisturbed. Then the pharaoh's mummy, with the jars and valuables, was interred deep inside the pyramid. How does one digest all the dimensions of this 4,000-year civilization that Dr. Ben has outlined for us? The answer is simple: you can't. That would require the kind of long study that Dr. Ben himself is engaged in. But there are some basic understandings for us all that can be useful to us in these times, as you will see and hear in our next and last edition. Visit over a dozen sites.
You fly from here to Aswan at least 1 hour, generally 1 hour and 15 minutes. Figure that they're coming down by river, no motor, to bring all this material here. They have to quarry it in Aswan and then bring it here. And they didn't finish there. They bring it, put it in place and finish it. People think that they do all the carving and everything at a place and bring it up, put it up. No, they put up the stone and did the carving after that. The Pharaoh died, okay? He dies. They have to take him and wash him and do the rituals. Then the opening of the mouth ceremony, right? But they don't perform the rest of the performance. They must ritualize him in the Valley Temple.
The body of the pharaoh was taken up this causeway to the mortuary temple, where the mummification took place. Vital organs were removed and placed in special jars. So was the blood. A tedious process would preserve the corpse indefinitely if undisturbed. Then the pharaoh's mummy, with the jars and valuables, was interred deep inside the pyramid. How does one digest all the dimensions of this 4,000-year civilization that Dr. Ben has outlined for us? The answer is simple: you can't. That would require the kind of long study that Dr. Ben himself is engaged in. But there are some basic understandings for us all that can be useful to us in these times, as you will see and hear in our next and last edition. Visit over a dozen sites. However, this 3.5-hour documentary on a 4,000-year civilization can at best be an overview, even with the guidance of Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben himself has devoted decades studying here and continues to do so. The perspective that Dr. Ben has given to the story has often sponsored controversy, for which he has paid a heavy price. I asked him if he thought it was worth it.
Yeah, I'll do it again. I'll do it again because what it has here, what it is saying to the world, it relieved people from a religious bondage, religious slavery. If people knew what was here, they could see all the lies being told to them. They will see the reality and truth about religion. They see the love that the ancient did when they started this. They will see that, for instance, the Virgin Mary concept of Immaculate Conception is nothing new. And they were dealing with a human condition. And the whole thing based upon a God, especially a Unitarian God. One God came from here, not from Rome, not from England, London, not from Greece, Athens. It came from here. Whether you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or what, You got the basis of what your religion is here along the Nile.
This place in the Nile Valley, is this the seat of the world's first major civilization?
Oh, yes. Egypt is the mother of the Western world civilization. It didn't start here. It started where Henophis said at the beginning of the Nile, but it reached its zenith here. The whole world must look to Egypt. The entire world, bar not a single country. Every high culture must come here for the beginning of what they are. I don't care if it's Jewish, if you're Christian or you're Muslim, if you're Greek or you're Roman, you must come here.
The marvelous structures along the Nile provide much more than an awesome display of size and beauty. These are the documents of and by the people who built them. You'll note that no edifice is bare. The writings and artistic renderings tell of the pharaohs and queens who are identified by nameplates called cartouches.
The Pharaoh was a representative of God for the people. The people contact with their God was through the Pharaoh. A bad Pharaoh, God looked upon the people as being responsible for him.
Well, how did one become a pharaoh?
From birthright or from revolution, overthrowing the current Pharaoh, or you gain it by birthright, or you are a commoner and you marry the daughter of a Pharaoh who has legal right. So in other words, you inherited from the woman.
Where did the pharaoh live in relationship to the people?
He lived at the palace, and the palace was generally connected to the worship temple or to the burial temple or the pyramid.
So the palace was actually not a palace as we think of it, but it was part of the temple area.
Part of the complex.
I see. Did the people have access to their pharaoh?
Oh, yes.
Or was he aloof and apart from them?
No. The access to the pharaoh, however, they had the access to a number of transition from one secretary or one office to the next, to the prime minister, and they could see the pharaoh. There were many pharaohs who held people court, had certain days when the people were allowed to talk to the pharaoh.
Was the pharaoh omnipotent, or did he have advisors?
The pharaoh had advisors, and the most important advisor was the chief priest.
Like this Imhotep you mentioned.
Imhotep was not the chief priest. He was like the Manetho.
I see.
Manetho. The chief, especially when it came to war or anything that could involve disaster, the pharaoh listened to his chief priest, because remember, the chief priest had the ears of God, the direct connection, the intercessory between man and his deity was the chief priest. The next is the preparation of the coronation scene with the putting of the crown on the pharaoh's head. And here you have the god Nit and goddess putting the goddesses Nit and the other one putting the crown on the king's head.
Pharaohs like the mighty Ramesses had their own temples built and made additions to others, adorning them with their likeness, but the temples were always in honor of a god or goddess. These deities were identified by headdress or by having the head or body of a symbolic creature.
This hasn't been defaced as badly.
No.
All right, and so we can now see the difference between the two systems.
Right. The one to the right is Nephthys, and the other one in the front to the left is Isis. Then
the one on the right is which one now?
One on the right is her sister Nephthys.
Nephthys. And what is that on top of this? The orb?
A maze. It's called a maze.
All right. And the one on the left is Isis?
Isis with a throne on her head.
That's a throne.
Now there she is with her husband.
Okay. Now.
There she is with her husband, Osiris. And he's in what is called the Osirian position. 2 foot together. Hands crossed.
Dead.
As an S, he's dead. That's called the Osirian position. Anytime you see Osiris standing, he's going to be that way because he's a god of the dead, god of the deceased, god of resurrection.
So whenever you see a figure with their feet together and they're holding The crop and what is the other one?
The crook. The crook and the flail.
The flail.
It will be. He's never shown other way when he's standing.
Houses ancient miniature wood carvings depicting the everyday lives of the common folk. When conducting his tours, Dr. Ben always employs local guides to work with him. Farouk has been with Dr. Ben since 1980, working in the Aswan area.
Did you see many tour groups with people of African descent before Dr. Ben?
No. I have seen, it only was, so individuals like 2, 3 in a group, but not like what, since Dr. Ben started, we saw the African Americans in Egypt, and that was exactly the time. And when was exactly was also the Aztec was the biggest group ever in 87. So the people in Egypt, everyone they don't know about the African Americans until Dr. Ben started his groups in Egypt. Maybe majority. I mean, the common people in the country, in the village, they don't know anything about until Dr. Ben started his groups to Egypt here and his tours to Egypt.
Does he teach a different perspective of the Nile civilization than the usual?
Well, yes, what he is, it's a kind of what all the Egyptologists study, what is the books and what it's published and written from the 18th century, since that time. So there is a same one track. And I say now, when is the Dr. Benz and the professors, they started to open a new way of, study, or so this is something different than what it's written, what the archaeologists or the tour guides studied in their own way. So
you mean one is a European perspective and Dr. Ben is an African perspective?
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
A lot of people say that all of this was not built by people of color, that this was all built by whites. Dr. Ben seems to be saying something different.
Well, it's who is...
I want to thank everybody for being out, everybody for tapping in today. Sorry about that. Sometimes when I'm going back and forth and mute my mic, I want to thank everybody for tapping in. We'll be tapped back in, good videos, good content. Continue to do the work of the universe. You know what I'm saying? I realized on my break, sometimes I would sit back and look at my combos and be like, man, I was doing nature's work. So I just wanted to make sure I continue with every day that I got breath in my lungs and continue to move forward, to continue to educate and to get all of us on the same accord so we can build all these concepts. So when you're talking to people and when you build other like minds, we all can have similar accords. But I want to thank y'all for tapping into episode 16. And we'll be back and we're going to get at y'all. Yo, Organic Minds, Willie Walker BH. We out.